All right, greetings, folkaroos. It's Haley back for the so-called final exam of Chess Fundamentals course. Today, we are going to be reviewing my first two ever online chess games, played on the date of February 12th, 2021. And we're going to try to I'm going to try to make this so I'm not like making fun of my old self, because believe me, there's a lot to make fun of. I'm going to try to really pick apart where I went wrong using the stuff that we've learned from the three previous videos in this series. And I think that will make this a better experience for both me and you, rather than just having a video of me making fun of my old self for being bad at chess when I hadn't played. So this first game right here, I was on the white pieces. This was my first. I mean, I played a few games against my sister, but those were really kind of like meme games. We weren't like actually trying our hardest. This was the first game I actually played against a random online person. Like, I pressed play on chess.com and it matched me up against this person. And you know how sometimes on chess.com, like when you first start, it puts you at like 1200 elo. Yeah, so my opponent in this game was rated around 1400. So, as you can imagine, it didn't go too well for me. But after the first two moves from each side, you couldn't really tell that, because both sides take the center with their pawns. Both sides put their knight out. This looks really normal so far. This looks like one of the games that I'm going to play. Like, maybe now I'm going to play bishop c4. We could get like this. We could get some development. Maybe I'm going to take the center immediately. But no, I commit a pretty grave positional sin in this position by playing the move pawn to d3. Now, if you can remember from, I think it was video 2, that I talked about this sort of pawn structure and how you want to normally have the pawns connecting to each other like that. But I did make this sort of caveat that it's not really great if you block your bishop from developing. And that's kind of what's happening here. And the computer's saying what black should do is immediately just take the center, because I haven't taken the center as much as I could. And they're going to be better because they have more control and they can quickly develop their pieces. Because this move is just kind of playing defensively when I should be developing my pieces, taking control of the center, and gaining tempi. Remember that word, tempi, on black's pieces. So black plays d5. Like I said, black is a 1400 rated player, so black knows what they're doing. And you might be like, well, after this, there's knight c3, development with tempo. But actually, this is completely fine for black, because they still have control of the center with this pawn, and it is defended, and it's actually really hard to attack it, because in order to attack it, the only way is putting queen right in front of that bishop, making it literally unable to move. So that's why that is kind of okay for black. But yeah, after d5, I play knight c3, just developing my knight, putting a double threat on this pawn, but it is kind of a double-edged move, because this pawn that I'm attacking just goes forward and attacks the knight. Now, I have a couple of options here. The best move is this, just getting out of the way. I could also go here, but then I would just get booted out again, and then the bishop would capture the knight, doubling my pawns, which is not very great. So I decided to go back to e2, which is the best move, and my opponent also plays the best move, which is to develop a bishop and just attack this, threatening to ruin my pawn structure by making me have doubled f-pawns. So let's say I just did this, here, and here. This is not good for white, because normally you want to castle this way in these structures. But since this is the opening, like, the computer's saying that this pawn structure is really strong, and the knight can let go and control the center. Black's a little behind in development, but for our purposes, this is not something that we want, right? Just for beginners' purposes, like, it's kind of, you want to try to avoid that. So what the computer wants me to do here is to just go here, because if pawn takes, I can then develop my knight back to that square, and actually have more control over to the center. That's a little bit complicated. What I do here is not a bad move. I play h3. This kind of induces black to create this doubled pawn weakness. So yeah, black is better in this position because this bishop just has no good moves. This knight can go like here and here, but that's going to take a while. Black has two very powerful central pawns. They can move their queen and castle this way. They can develop really quickly this way. Like, black just has a very comfortable position. Whoops. And they played queen f6, immediately targeting the weakness that they created. This is very great play from black. Now, what you should do is do something about this pawn. Either defend it with the bishop, or push it so that it is defended by two pieces, and it challenges this pawn. But what I do is not great. I play c4, which doesn't really serve any sort of purpose. I mean, yeah, you could say that it does take the center, but way black can do en passant, even though it's not really a great move. Black can do that, but B, this just completely leaves the pawn hanging, which black does take. And white is now considerably worse because the queen is now in my territory, attacking the rook, pressuring everything in my center, and like 3 of black's pieces haven't even been developed yet. Black still has good control. And this pawn structure, while it looks solid, this d3 pawn could become weak because it has no defenders other than the queen in the long term, right? So in this position, I get very, very a lot of tunnel vision, and I play the move knight to g1, which just straight up hangs the rook. Like, this is going right back to basics. You know what I mean? Like, just whenever your opponent has a piece that is pressuring your pieces, you always have to keep track of where it sees, what piece it sees, right? And you'll see that, oh, the queen sees the rook and it is unguarded. So what I need to do is move the rook out of the way. Very simple move. But I play knight g1 because I'm like, oh, me attack queen, that must be a good move because I get a tempo, but it's more important to guard your rook, obviously. And now the queen is just pressuring the knight, and when the knight moves, this pawn will be weak. And like I said, these pieces still have yet to develop. So things are about to get really bad for white. And things do get bad because for some reason I try to trade queens in this position. I go queen to f3. And for reasons that I don't think I have to go into too much depth to explain, it is not good to trade pieces, like to do equal value trades when you are down material, because if you trade all your pieces, your opponent will have an extra piece and just win in the endgame. A, that's the first reason that this move isn't good, and also B, it just hangs the knight, which my opponent takes. I have just lost 2 pieces because the only thing that I'm focusing on is trying to get the queen out of there and not like defending my position. And now I'm just completely losing. The queen has taken my rook and a knight and is now pinning the bishop to the king. Remember, bishop can't move because it would be check. And my only developed piece is the queen. That's just not good because it's not doing anything. What's it pressuring? That? I mean, okay. But that's not gonna, get any benefits. And I just, for some reason, I had a bloodlust to trade the queens in this position because I played queen to g2. Just trading queens down 2 full pieces. But in this position, my opponent throws in kind of a fancy move. Check, and I block, and then they take to put my king in the center, removing my ability to castle. Because remember what I said about a king in the middle is much easier to attack, especially if it has no defensive pieces around it. And my opponent ensures that I will not have that many defensive pieces around the king by immediately trading the queens. Like, this is very good play for my opponent. My king is just completely left stranded, and black will develop and castle and just have pressure. So black immediately castles, right? Rook c1, just sort of guarding my pawn, I guess. And then this move. This move, the knight can't really go anywhere. It's just kind of a developing move. It doesn't really do anything, but black is up so much material now that they can literally just move their king back and forth over and over again and still be winning. So bishop to f3. Maybe I want to give this check, but then black can trade this, so that's not really good. Again, you don't want to trade down material. And what black goes there. So the purpose of putting the knight here was to assist in a pawn break in destabilizing my center. Like, this is black is playing fantastically, because the one thing that white does have is pretty decent central control with these pawns. So just challenging the pawns in the middle is the way you need to go. And I play bishop to h5, which makes literally no sense. It doesn't see anything. It can just be booted out by g6. But my opponent takes, and then attacks this pawn, which I push. I mean, solid enough. And my opponent goes back to a6, and is now planning to do this, targeting my weak central pawn, because now, this is a concept I'd like to introduce, split pawns. Like, what this pawn capture did was it split these pawns, because before they were kind of connected, but both of these pawns were defended by the d pawn. But now after this, the d pawn has to leave its defense of this pawn, and both of these pawns are weak. They have been split. They are no longer protecting each other. So this is a very good positional decision for my opponent. And then that happens, and then rook g1, sort of just aimlessly attacking a pawn. I guess it's one of the better moves, but black's just going to centralize the knight. Pieces are more powerful from the center, if you can remember. I take the pawn, black takes with check, and takes another pawn with check. I mean, obviously it would be better to protect my pawn, but I mean, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that I'm going to lose at this point. So check, d3 check, protected by the knight and rook. So I go and blockade it. This is actually a decent move, but it's going to be very easy for black to get my king out of there. e4. I attack the knight, but then in comes whoa, never mind, hold on. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Black just takes another free pawn. And I play rook to g3, attacking it, but in comes e3 check. What this move does is it sacrifices a pawn to get my king out from blockading this pawn on its way to promotion. That's just solid play. Like, now my opponent could play this move, and my king cannot stop the pawn from promoting. It's just a nice little pawn sacrifice there. Remember what I taught you last video about deflection sacrifices. This deflects the king away from stopping the promotion. Very nice. King takes e3, knight f5 check. We have a fork, another tactical concept from the third video. Oh man, this is actually really funny, right? This pawn to e3 move is both a deflection and an attraction sacrifice, because it deflects the king away from stopping the promotion, but it also attracts the king into knight f5, forking the king and rook. That is crazy. Look at how those concepts come together. That is nice. King to d2, and after knight takes rook, I just resign, because I don't think I can win down 15 points of material. All right. That was my first game, and for some reason I decided to play another game after getting absolutely trounced. Now, this game starts off about the same, like d4, d5, e3. My opponent makes a questionable move, blocking in their bishop. Like, black has a try for an advantage here. If they just quickly develop the pieces, put the bishop out like this. Because you can't play e5, so you just got to develop your pieces to control the center rather than using pawns. Knight c6 is an okay move. Knight f3. And now, obviously, the best move is either to develop a knight, or to put your bishop out, or you can even just play e6. You need to improve your position somehow. And I play e6. blocking in my bishop, but this bishop can develop easily, this knight can develop easily, and I can castle. So actually this bishop isn't really too important for now, because the goal is to castle and get my king safe while also activating these pieces. Because white has sort of played in a very passive defensive way, and if I get my pieces out quickly, I will be able to try for an advantage. That should be pretty easy to understand. But after bishop to b5, I just make a move that I can't even attempt to make sense of. Like, this game has been relatively reasonable so far. Like, I've put my pawns out, developed my knight, so has white. But in this position, some, like, demonic force possesses my mouse and makes me play king to e7, which is just a bad move for so many reasons. Like I said, I'm not going to make fun of myself, but this deserves a little bit of poking fun at, if you know what I mean. Because not only does this remove your right to castle, because the king and the rook have to not move in order to castle, it permanently puts your king in the center of the board. It allows bishop takes, doubling your pawns, and it just doesn't do anything to develop or improve your position, and it blocks in your dark squared bishop. Your dark squared bishop can no longer move because your king is in the way. So this position just sabotages your own development and allows white to create weaknesses all in one. So it's just not good. So white immediately cashes in on creating the doubled pawns and then brings the knight out. Now, this knight is the only piece that white has out. When white has one active piece, you need to scan what is it threatening. It's not threatening to go here. It's not threatening to go here. It's not threatening to go here, but it is threatening to go here. And that would be a royal fork. So you need to guard that pawn so that the only piece white has developed cannot make a threat on you. But I have tunnel vision. I'm just like, oh, I see a knight on my side of the board. I'm going to kick it out, and I blunder a royal fork. And I'm just completely losing. So just like that, my position completely is just really bad. It just falls on its head. White castles very calmly. This pawn structure is really solid. This bishop can actually deploy out like this. The knight can go here. White has various ways of developing their pieces while keeping the structure intact, and I've just lost my queen. It's as simple as that. Like, I'm just way worse. So bishop d6 develops a piece. That's a good move. Knight to d2, right? Knight to d2, and now white's going to move the knight, move the bishop, and just have a great position. Bishop to d7, developing a piece. I can't complain about that. Maybe you want to go here and get a tempo on the rook, even though that's not really too much of a threat. c4. Just again, attacking my center control. Because in both of these games so far, I've somehow managed to have, like, good center control with my pawns. So my higher rated opponents know that they have to sort of undermine my center in order to make their position even better. So rook to b8 just is a nothing move. Like, I'm not threatening anything at all. So white just expands. Like, look at this structure here. Look at this structure that white has. They have 4 pawns, all defended by this pawn, which is defended by the king and the rook. So this is like an impenetrable wall of pawns. And it's also attacking this bishop. Like, look at how bad this bishop is. It can't get out this way because it's staring at that pawn, and it can't get out this way because this pawn wall is preventing it. So white just has a dominant pawn structure here, and also a dominant material advantage, obviously. So a3, and I try to break up the pawn structure. This is a good move, but white just doesn't want to do that. White reinforces their structure. This is like really aesthetically pleasing, actually, as well as strategically beneficial. So bishop to b5 gets the tempo on the rook, but it just very calmly moves out of the way. And then I play a move which like rook to a8, which I guess my intention was to go here and split these pawns. Remember we talked about splitting? But rook to a8 is just a very depressing move to have to play, and you will see like 2 moves from now that that's not at all what the point of rook a8 was, because after a4 attacking my bishop, I move back. There is pawn takes and pawn takes in the center, and actually this transformation is good for me. If the material wasn't at +7 for white, this would be a good transformation for me because I have 2 very powerful pawns in the center. But after knight f3, just attacking my pawn, I play rook back to b8. So let me just rewind for a second. After move 11, I played rook b8, and then a few moves later, I played rook a8, and then a few moves after that, I played rook back to b8. So this is kind of a more intermediate concept, but you can't just like shuffle your pieces around. If you're losing, you have to create threats. You have to get tempo on white's pieces. And just shuffling your rook back and forth over and over again isn't going to help anybody, because you blunder one of your central pawns with the threat of a fork on the king and the rook. Like, sure, you're going to get this pawn back, but you're going to lose your rook in the process. So is that really worth it? So b5, my opponent is like, all right, so before I even do this, I can stop you from taking my pawn by pushing it up and attacking your bishop. The bishop goes back, attack the bishop again, it goes back. Like, look at how bad my bishops are. Like, this pawn structure is just keeping my king in a box. This is good, and these pieces just have a lot of potential to do damage, as well as this knight attacking my pawn and threatening the fork. So the knight takes the pawn, and I actually pin the knight to the rook, which is a decent move, but white does have checkmate in this position with queen takes d5, king to e7, bishop to a3, very sneaky move, king to e8, queen f7 check, and queen f8. That is the checkmate that white has, but white did not find that checkmate. Instead, defended the knight and got in the way of the pin with bishop to b2, which is a good move if you don't see the checkmate. Like, we're just trying to be solid here, just trying to adhere to our principles. Just get in the way of pins so that they don't, because this is a relative pin, right? So that the knight can move. Like, now you get in the way of the pin, so the knight is not stuck, right? So rook to b6, it just makes absolutely no sense. That mate that I showed you is still being blundered, but opponent forks and takes the rook, which is also perfectly okay, but I do take the bishop. It's not really optimal for white, but again, +10 material is really nothing to scoff at, and losing a bishop is fine. Rook a2, bishop goes back to c3, attacking the rook, and queen takes d5. This is a sacrifice of a rook, but it is not really a sacrifice of a rook, because if you take the rook, then in comes queen f7 check, and queen f8 is the same mate that I showed you earlier, but my opponent takes the knight, which is understandable, because as a human, you're like, oh, there's a free knight, why should I not take it? Right? But that does extend the game a little bit. It's kind of important to see, like, you make a threat on a rook, but since you are up so much material, you don't even need to worry about the rook. Just go and attack the king. The goal of chess is to take the king, not to win material. So you're like, oh, sure, have my rook, I'm going to win the game. Queen takes g8, king e7, and now we have queen takes g7, king d6. The king is running to the middle of the board, which, remember, is really dangerous because there's various checks. There's various checks that the king can face. So there, king goes back, check again, here, and watch this for my opponent. They attack my rook, sacrificing this pawn. But this is actually an attraction sacrifice, because if the rook takes the pawn, which it does in the game, then queen to d3 forks the king and the rook. But I can go here. You're saying I can go here, right? Like, that's not a sacrifice. But then there's rook c2. And if I go here, it's mate. Rook b2, king c5, rook b5, defended by the queen. My only move is to take the pawn, and then queen d5 mate. So that is another nice little pawn sacrifice to attract my rook to the fork square from black and from white, and of course they just take the rook, and the game promptly ends. I try to get a tempo on the queen, but like that doesn't matter at this point. Like white could even lose the queen and probably still be winning. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it was still like +2 if this happened. Yeah, it's +3 still. Like white can literally sack the queen and still be winning. So queen e5, and then queen takes c7, threatening a pretty much unstoppable mate on f7, guarded by the knight. And that is how my first 2 games of chess went. And as an aside from like the technical chess that we just went through, we sort of went back on the chess fundamentals. As an aside, like I said in my intro video, if you watched that, I've been a beginner before. Obviously, these games show that. Like, I've been a beginner before. I've gotten absolutely stomped in these games, but I did not give up. And that's why I am here where I'm at now. And I'm hoping that I can sort of give a little bit of that spirit to continue improving to you guys by showing you, how bad I used to be, for lack of a better word. But yeah, that is the so-called final exam of the Fundamentals of Chess course, and I will see you next week with, I forget what video I'm doing next week, but I will see you next week with that video. All right, bye!